Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Again, this is Scott Hamway. I'm the Director of Bus Modernization for the MBTA. Before we start tonight's meeting on the proposed MBTA bus maintenance facility in Quincy, I want to let everybody in the audience today know that this meeting is being recorded. So please keep that in mind. And I want to apologize up front. We were out in the community in January, and I think our preference is always to do meetings such as this face-to-face in the community with the community. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, we've been unable to do that, and we didn't feel like it made sense to delay this meeting any longer. We want to make sure that we're able to respond to what we heard from the community back in January, as well as to get back in front of you and give you an update on what our plans are. And we hope to be able to do these meetings going forward in the future face-to-face as soon as that's safe for all of us to do so. So I'll be giving the bulk of the presentation this evening. I just want to introduce briefly some folks who you may be hearing from later in the presentation who are here on the meeting with me tonight. We have the MBTA's Chief Engineer, Eric Studehoff, as well as the MBTA's Chief Real Estate Officer, Richard Henderson. I'm also joined by Alexander Markevich, who's the manager of the Bus Modernization Program, and a few members of there's Richard, and then a few members of the Jacobs engineering team. That's our consultant support for this program. Kogel Diekman, Lou Rubito, and Lydia Rivera. I do want to say that if anybody's having any technical difficulties during this meeting, they're not able to hear audio, or they're having trouble with the GoToMeeting system, if you please call Lydia Rivera. Her number is 617-851-1095. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to present an update on our plans for the Quincy Bus Maintenance Facility with a PowerPoint presentation, as well as to discuss feedback from the January community meeting. And then once we're done with the presentation, there'll be a live question and answer session that we'll hold. And I'll describe that session, how that'll work in just a moment. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Some of you may have taken the opportunity to view a recorded version of this presentation in advance of this meeting. It was pre-recorded and available on the MBTA website to allow people who were unable to participate at this time the opportunity to view the presentation and provide comments in advance. We did receive some comments in advance, which we will answer as part of tonight's question and answer session. So we'll begin with the PowerPoint presentation and then move into a question and answer. Before we go into the bulk of the presentation, I'd like to go over the Q&A process to ensure everybody's comfortable with using the control panel to interact with us. So during Q&A, you can press the raise your hand button, which you see here and should be visible on the right side of your screen in this yellow box here. When you raise your hand, we'll have a sort of a record of the order in which you raised it, and then we can call on you once the Q&A session begins. If you are not comfortable speaking in front of the entire group, you also can share a comment by entering it into the question field, which is shown here on your screen. And you can type those questions in. Those questions will be visible to everybody attending the meeting, and then we can take those questions as well, along with the raised hand questions at the end of the meeting. And as I said, we will also address the written questions that were submitted in advance after we posted the presentation yesterday. And again, if anybody has any technical difficulties, Lydia Rivera's number again is 617-851-1095. So the presentation today, I'll start with an overview of the MBTA's bus modernization program, then review some of the key issues that were raised in the community meeting the MBTA attended back on January 29th. I'll provide an overview of the MBTA's current vision for the project and outline next steps. At the MBTA, we like to start our meetings with what we call a safety moment. And today I'd like to take a moment to introduce attendees to the MBTA's Ride Safer campaign, the MBTA's commitment to keeping our passengers safe as the Massachusetts economy reopens. This campaign consists of three components: providing face masks to riders in need at key stations during peak travel times and for a limited time, a public service campaign in our stations, platforms, and vehicles with signage and messaging to inform riders about how to keep themselves and their fellow riders safe, including promoting the importance of keeping a safe distance and wearing face coverings while on the T. You can see some examples from stations like Maverick Station, where the campaign was launched last weekend. Finally, a new web page to provide the latest information, as well as a behind-the-scenes look at our expanded efforts to clean and disinfect stations and vehicles. You can learn more about the Ride Safer program at www.mbta.com/ride-safer. At this point, before we go into the presentation, I'd like to launch a quick poll question that you should be able to answer, that should show up on your screen and that you should be able to answer quickly. And the question is, how many of you participated in the January 29th meeting? We've got a good number of attendees on the meeting today, 85. We had a good crowd back on the 29th. So this is just a quick exercise for folks to kind of give us a sense of how many people are new to the project and how many of you are repeat customers, so to speak. So I believe the poll will be open for just a few seconds. Okay, so it looks like we've got basically an even split between between those who attended back in January and those who are attending today for the first time. So I think the next few slides will be a repeat for those who were in attendance before, but are going to be perhaps useful context for those who are participating for the first time. A quick note here that ridership statistics provided here and potentially some other slides in the presentation are the same ones we presented back in January. These were pre-COVID-19 ridership statistics. But the bus system typically carries about a third of MBTA's daily ridership, which is second only to the subway system. And while ridership loss has been significant across the MBTA in recent months, the bus systems actually experience smaller ridership losses compared to other modes, underscoring the critical role that it plays in the network. We provide this service with a fleet of over 1,000 vehicles operating over 170 routes. And with transit, we often, and at the MBTA, we often talk about the role that we can play in meeting what we call the 3 E's, regional goals for equity, the economy, and the environment. The MBTA bus system plays a critical role in providing equitable access to mobility. While the MBTA is one of the few big city transit systems that attracts customers from across the demographic spectrum, the bus system carries the largest share of low-income and minority riders. And that's a statistic that's consistent even when we just look at those routes operated out of the MBTA's current bus facility on Hancock Street. We know that for a region as densely populated as Boston's, and with such a concentration of employment in the historic core, that transit plays a critical role in supporting regional economic health. Even in the last several months, when the region's nationally recognized roadway congestion, at least temporarily abated, the MBTA generally and the bus network specifically have played a vital role in connecting the essential workforce with their places of employment. Quincy's been a major focus of that regional growth in recent years, and the type of dense development in and around downtown Quincy is predicated on a reliable and efficient MBTA system. The bus is also a key component of MBTA strategies to reduce the transportation sector's impact on the environment. By providing more and better bus service, we can encourage more people to choose transit over driving. Our newer buses are cleaner than ever before, and the MBTA is committed to a battery electric bus fleet as that technology becomes viable. And the bus is part of the transit system that supports denser and more sustainable development, like the kind we just talked about in downtown Quincy. The MBTA has launched the bus modernization program to support our bus system by investing in those facilities where our fleet is stored and maintained. The goals of this program are threefold: better conditions for our workforce so they can effectively maintain and operate our buses, additional capacity so we can increase service to meet demand, as our facilities currently represent a barrier to adding additional buses and therefore additional rush hour service. And finally, to support the conversion to the zero emissions bus fleet I referenced earlier. In order to support this fleet of over 1,000 buses, the MBTA has 9 facilities around the region where we both store and maintain our vehicles. These facilities tend to be old and in need of significant reinvestment at a minimum, with the Quincy facility among the oldest, and in fact, in operation as a transit facility even before the introduction of bus service in the region. I'll note here that the Quincy bus facility on Hancock Street is somewhat unique and that it operates more like a local or sub-regional facility. Unlike most of our facilities closer to downtown Boston, Quincy's routes overwhelmingly serve Quincy. The Hancock Street facility is home to 86 buses, and due to structural issues is only able to accommodate our oldest buses, as lower vertical clearances in the building prevent us from storing and maintaining any of the modern buses made after 2010, which have a taller vertical profile. The MBTA determined that it would be infeasible to rebuild the Hancock Street facility without temporarily moving buses to another location during construction, and also impractical, as a facility rebuilt to modern standards on this site, which could support the conversion to battery electric buses, would result in a reduction in the number of buses which could be accommodated there, and a resulting reduction in bus service. One of the challenges for the MBTA was finding a site that was as convenient to Quincy Center, from where nearly all of our routes originate from this facility. The MBTA identified the former Lowe's property at 599 Bergen Parkway as being almost as well located relative to Quincy Center as Hancock Street. We were invited by Ward City Councilor Brian Palmucci to attend a community meeting back in January to discuss our plans for the Lowe's site. There were a number of questions and issues raised at that meeting, many of which we were able to address that evening, but I wanted to be sure we touched on a few of those unresolved issues here today. And you see the issues listed out here on the screen that we'll try to cover over the rest of the presentation. There was a lot of discussion at that meeting about what type of vehicles the MBTA would operate out of the new facility. Once this facility is open, the MBTA will be able to operate its newest diesel hybrid buses. These buses, which the MBTA has already operated in other portions of the network, are able to operate off engine and on battery roughly 25% of the time. And the MBTA is working with the manufacturer on developing geofencing capabilities. This would allow us to ensure that the vehicles are operating off engine and on the battery when they pass school zones or nursing homes, as well as when arriving at and operating in the vicinity of a new bus facility like the one we're proposing at 599 Bergen Parkway. And even though battery electric bus technology may not be quite ready to roll out by 2024, the date by which we're targeting to open this new facility, it will be the first MBTA facility capable of accommodating them. There was also a lot of interest in how the MBTA identified the 599 Bergen Parkway site and what other sites it evaluated. The MBTA's first goal when looking for property for a project is to find a site that is either vacant or for sale or lease, so as to avoid the cost, time, and disruption of having to relocate an existing business. When this goal was combined with the need for at least 10 acres of land and a need to be proximate to the route network served by the Hancock Street facility, the MBTA's real estate team identified a half dozen sites to evaluate. While the MBTA has not yet acquired the former Lowe's property, we will be including comprehensive information on our evaluation of alternative locations as part of our environmental filing with the Federal Transit Administration, a public document which we'll be making available this month. Tonight we'll share some of the highlights from that analysis. This map shows the existing MBTA bus facility on Hancock Street at the top of the map. Below that is Quincy Center Station, as I mentioned, the hub of bus service for the routes operating out of this garage. 8 alternative locations are also highlighted, including our selected location at 599 Bergen Parkway in the middle of the map. This map has been updated to include the locations proposed by the community at the January 29th meeting, in addition to those that we had evaluated in advance. Each site was evaluated against all of the criteria you see here, with 599 Bergen Parkway deemed the best option of those initially evaluated, particularly given its superior location relative to the Quincy bus network, and the fact that it was property that did not have a currently operating private business. We did receive questions in January to look at the Home Depot and an additional location in Braintree. Although the Home Depot site, by virtue of having an existing business that would need to be relocated, is less preferable to the 599 Bergen site, its evaluation will be added to our federal environmental filing due to the comments we received from the community in January. While 599 Bergen Parkway lacked an active business, in order to create a second means of access to our facility, we were going to significantly impact the adjacent business to the north, Caniff Monuments. In response to public comment at the January meeting, we revised our plan to minimize the impact to that property owner, who we are in active discussions with. We have also initiated discussions with other adjacent property owners, and we'll discuss the project's relationship to adjacent properties in a few slides. Before we describe this new project, I'll mention that the MBTA entered into a lease agreement with New England Development last month. The purpose of that lease is to accommodate other short-term needs of the MBTA: storage of spare parts associated with the new red and orange line fleets, and overflow parking to support the acceleration of capital improvements at the Quincy Adams parking garage. In response to public comment on January 29th and concerns raised about pedestrian safety at the Bergen Parkway Penn Street intersection, both currently and during a future where red line overflow parking is occurring on site, the MBTA is advancing improvements to that intersection. These improvements include restriping of crosswalks, new signage, new pedestrian activation devices at the medians for stranded pedestrians, and new lead pedestrian intervals to give those on foot a few seconds lead time before concurrent vehicle traffic. That last feature in particular has been shown to reduce pedestrian vehicle collisions by over 60% in other implementations. The implementation of these improvements should commence within the next month. The key components of the project are outlined here and covered in more detail on subsequent slides. The primary features are a bus maintenance and storage building that can accommodate up to 135 buses, although we anticipate 120 as the target number that maximizes the efficiency of the building while still accommodating meaningful growth in the size of the Quincy fleet. We will also have a floor of office space for yet to be determined MBTA department and employee parking for 235 spaces. The next few slides show an overview of the site plan and the interior circulation of the building. We'll start with the site plan and the major features to point out. Starting from the top left in red, you see the new pedestrian pathway that we would construct between Grasso Park on Columbia Street and the sidewalk in front of the Deco apartments, seen in gray. We have initiated, that sidewalk is seen in gray. We have initiated discussions to work with Deco to identify the best way to make that connection. Across the street from Deco, we will be building a sidewalk intended primarily to serve MBTA employees accessing our building from the red line. You see that as the blue line on the image. The gap between the red and blue lines in this plan is the entry point to the bus maintenance facility for our buses. Along Bergen Parkway and across the Quincy Adams, you can see the proposed site of the electrical substation. By locating the substation along busy Bergen Parkway, we were able to minimize impacts to the Caniff property, maintain as much distance as possible from residential uses, and do so within the portion of the site identified as preferred in our initial conversations with the utility provider. The dashed red line that you see along Bergen is our new reconstructed sidewalk. The current one does not provide an accessible path of travel. That new sidewalk will tie into the new intersection we will create at the extension of Columbia Street for a new access point to the facility. We'll be creating new sidewalks along that extension so the residents of this section of Penn Street will have access to Quincy Adams Station. This new connection will be for authorized vehicles only, those being MBTA buses and employees, as well as the two adjacent commercial properties. Conversations with the city of Quincy are ongoing about the management of this portion of roadway and enforcement of its restricted access. This slide shows you the internal circulation of the facility. Buses will enter through a gate at the left end of this image, enter into a fueling and washing area. There's sufficient space on the property inside the gate to prevent buses from backing up onto the access road or Bergen Parkway, as well as buses having the opportunity to re-enter the site from the Columbia Street extension. Buses in need of maintenance or inspection will continue to the back of the site, where we will have 11 maintenance bays. Those ready to return to service would make a hard left into the area of the facility where interior cleaning occurs before returning to the storage area. The long white rectangle at the top of the building in this image is the area where all the support functions will be: supervisors, employee break rooms, locker rooms, training rooms, etc. Employees would enter the building on this side from the parking lot. I think it's important to note here that in a departure from many other MBTA bus facilities, our intention here is to build a facility where all of the work can occur indoors, which will make it a much better neighbor. These are images from other new bus facilities and other systems, and a good example of the types of interior spaces we'll be planning for. If you remember the earlier images from the Hancock Street facility, you can see how important this type of investment is to providing our workforce with the conditions they need to effectively do their jobs. The next several images are intended to illustrate what the exterior of the facility could look like, recognizing that that is the much more important consideration for the community than what the inside looks like. I do want to emphasize, though, that while we felt it was important to give the community a sense of scale and look of the facility, We're still at a very early point in the design process. These renderings could evolve over time. But this first one is a view coming from Grasso Park, headed towards Deco Apartments on that new pedestrian connection that I showed a few slides earlier. You can see the two-story support space for MBTA bus operators and mechanics, that sort of glass area that runs from left to right over the first 2/3 of the building that's visible. And we tried as much as we could with these next few images to match them up with current views, although lining it up, it's not always possible to do that perfectly. This view is in front of the Deco apartment complex. Here you see buses pulling out of the facility towards our access gate. The support spaces that I talked about earlier are that shorter portion of the building to the left. The next two views are from the Columbia Street side of the facility, this one from the end of Tabor Street. And here for the first time, you can see a third floor of the facility. That glassed area on the top left, this is that MBTA office space that I had referenced earlier in the presentation. And this is from a little bit farther down Columbia Street towards the plumbing supply company heading towards Penn Street. The last image is taken from Bergen Parkway, heading south from Quincy Center towards Quincy Adams Station. And again, you can see the top floor of office space more clearly in this rendering. Just a couple more slides to touch on a couple more points that were raised at the January 29th meeting. So in January, we received a lot of comments about traffic impacts associated with the project. We have conducted a traffic analysis for the site and have summarized the results here. Like the Lowe's store, the bulk of our traffic movements are not happening during rush hours, as most of our bus fleet's providing service by the time either of the peak periods begin, which is a good thing for traffic congestion. And we will generate less traffic on a daily basis than Lowe's did. For this and the noise and air pollution analyses on the next slide, I'll note that we tried to be conservative by assuming the maximum 135 bus capacity on the site. Although, as I noted earlier, we are unlikely to operate more than 120 buses. As part of our federal environmental review filing, we need to model the noise and air pollution impacts of our project. There was also interest in these issues on January 29th. The noise analysis showed that there would be minimal impacts, and the electrical substation, whose location shifted after that analysis, will be designed to minimize noise impacts. We also did not exceed any thresholds for air quality, and these analyses were doubly conservative, as they not only assumed the maximum fleet size of 135, they also assumed that the diesel hybrid buses we will be operating when the facility opens, not the battery electric bus fleet that the MBTA is ultimately moving towards, and which would have both lower noise and lower emissions impacts. I'll close just by laying out what some of the key next steps are for the process. We, as I mentioned earlier, will be filing our state and environmental review documents within the month for the bus maintenance facility. We will continue to work through our design process. We are between about 15 and 30% of the way through the design process, and we'll continue stakeholder engagement and communication. Certainly, people can continue to go to the website and email us with any questions and comments, and we are always happy to participate in community neighborhood meetings, tenants association meetings, any meeting you would like the MBTA to participate in, we're happy to participate in, whether that be in the current virtual meeting environment or once we're able to meet again face-to-face. And my contact information, in addition to the email address, the sort of generic email address for the project, can be found here. Just to go over the question and answer process again before we get into Q&A, I just wanted to recognize a few of the elected officials who are participating on the call. We do have the City of Quincy Mayor's Office represented by Frank Tremontosi. I see that Senator John Keenan is participating. We also have 3 city councilors, citywide councilors, Nina Liang and Ann Mahoney, and then Ward City Councilor Brian Palmucci, who are in attendance. I don't know that any of them have notified me that they'd like to say anything now, but certainly at any point in the Q&A, if any of you would like to comment, just send us a message and let us know, and we'll give you that opportunity to weigh in. I'll turn my camera back on. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be responding to questions and comments in the order that they were received. We can start with those folks who have raised their hand and wish to speak for the rest of the group. And then we'll go to the questions that were typed into the question form. And at the end, if there's time permitting, I would really like to also review those questions and comments that came in after yesterday's posting of the presentation. So Alexandra Markevich, who I had mentioned earlier, is with me here, and she's going to, I think, start to facilitate the question and answer process.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, Alexandra. This is Eric Studoff. I can hear you.
Larry, your microphone should be turned on.
Larry.
Larry.
Okay. Hi, thank you very much. Larry Cretion. I live in Quincy. I'm also the director of the Green Energy Consumers Alliance. Thanks for having me. I know there's a lot of local concerns, people who live right around the facility that should be heard tonight as they were before. My organization really wants to see all electric buses proliferate through all of the MBTA system as soon as possible for the environmental impacts and also the long-term money savings that you'll have at the MBTA because they're cheaper to operate and maintain. I'm a little confused that you're building the facility so that it'll have the specifications necessary to support all electric buses, but you're planning on filling them at first with diesel hybrids. And it seems to me that if you buy a bus in 2024 and it might have a lifetime of 10 to 15 years, Quincy would not see all electric buses until 2039, which to me just is too far down the road. And I know there might be some concerns about winter operation in cold temperatures and so forth. We're seeing that managed pretty well in Norway and Canada, and that there are different ways of managing that issue. So I'd like to know what your plans are with the diesel hybrids and when you expect to be able to fill the barn with all electric buses. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry, for that question. Yeah, and this is something we talked about back in January as well. I think that the MBTA right now is excited about two different vehicle technologies it's currently testing out of its Southampton garage. 5 of those are entirely battery electric, zero emissions operated buses that we're running on the Silver Line routes. And then we have another pilot bus, which is an extended range diesel hybrid bus. And we've gotten great results out of both of them. The battery electric buses operate significantly better, it has been our experience through one winter, in warm weather conditions than they do in cold weather conditions. These are buses that we're getting about 130 to 140 mile range out of on a charge, which is really good for most of our operations. Unfortunately, in the winter conditions, just given the frequency of our bus stops and the continuous opening and closing of doors as passengers board and alight our vehicles, we're seeing a significant drop in range down to the 30 to 40 mile a day range. That becomes much more problematic for us to kind of move to the technology if that's going to be the sort of winter condition. We are optimistic that the battery technology is continuing to get better and better to the point where we will be able to do more of a one-for-one replacement of our fleet with battery electric buses. There are systems that are exploring sort of secondary systems on the bus, fossil fuel burning systems on the bus that are covering the kind of heat element. I think the MBTA is very interested in moving to an entirely zero emissions fleet and believes that the technology is moving in the right direction. And we are exploring procurement options. Once we feel like the technology is there, we've got another winter that we'll get some experience from these 5 test buses. On the extended range diesel hybrid side, we've had very promising results from that vehicle. As I mentioned earlier, we're seeing 25%, even in some cases greater than that, percentage of runtime where we're going off engine. So we're able to, and these buses can run all day long. We don't have the same issues with charging capacity and range. So we feel like there's no question it's a significantly cleaner bus than is operated, significantly cleaner vehicle than is operated most anywhere else in the MBTA system today, and significantly cleaner than the buses that we're running out of the Hancock Street facility. So we think it's a great technology to start with. Because this facility opens as a diesel hybrid facility, certainly doesn't suggest that it would be that way until that fleet retired. Buses can move between garages. They don't have to be tied to a facility for their full life. And as I mentioned up front, this would be the first MBTA facility to be battery electric bus ready. So it only stands to reason this would be the first place they go once that technology gets where it's going to. And we think it's close. Just we don't want to commit or give people the impression that we think in 2024, if this facility opens, then that we're going to be in a position to go there on day one. So I just wanted to say that. And then I think the first 2 people who we tried to go their hands, we had a technical difficulty, so we're going to go back to them. But I did want to mention that Representative Chan has also joined us at the meeting today, so he's also in attendance, and will let us know if he would like to weigh in. But Alexander, did you want to go back to the initial commenter?
Sure. So, and apologies if I'm pronouncing folks' names wrong. Sajad Nafanchi. I'm going to try and unmute you, and you can go ahead and provide your question or comment.
Yeah, sure. It's my last name is pronounced Raisi Nafchi. I am Sajad. Thank you, Scott, and everybody else who gave us the presentation. I live next to with a few other folks actually who might be on this call on above Canif Stone workshop. So we are not far from this basically project that is going to happen. So my first question is, actually, and I should mention that I was not in January 29 meeting. I couldn't make it. So the first question I have is that I know that you don't need zoning. You don't need basically the citizens of Quincy, people who live in the neighborhood, approval to move forward with your project because you are a government entity and you don't respond to the city of Quincy. And as far as I know, there is pushback from the citizens. I know it was very compelling what you. I am an engineer, by the way. I am not a transportation engineer. I am a mechanical engineer, but kind of understood some of the things that the technical issues that you brought up and you try to respond to. And also wanted to say that, so regardless of what the feedback is, if you are happy or unhappy, you're going to move forward with the project because you don't respond to the city of Quincy and you don't basically you don't need zoning acceptance from the city of Quincy. So I just wanted to make that clear. If you have time, obviously I can have a conversation with you, but I just wanted to make that understand the first part of how it's going to be.
Thanks, Sajad. Yeah, and that's all understood, and certainly I'm happy to have a dialogue outside of this meeting if that's something you're interested in starting. I would just say a couple of things. Certainly, the MBTA, wants to be a good neighbor here and believes that certainly compared to a big non-local corporation that could have been on the site or may have been in the past. We like to think that we're a lot more accessible, both to the community and to the elected officials that represent the community. And we've made efforts thus far to work with the city of Quincy and expect to continue to do that and work with the city and work with the other elected officials in the area. And finally, I think the stakes are pretty high for the MBTA here. As I mentioned, this is the first investment in what we're envisioning to be a long process to modernize all of our bus facilities so that we can have modern facilities for our workforce, have the ability to expand service, and also to move towards a zero emissions future that we very much are targeting. If we come in here and deliver a facility that is a bad neighbor visually, in other ways where we're not responsive to community concerns, that's certainly only digging ourselves a hole for the rest of this program. So I think the MBTA is very interested in doing right by the community at this location, and we're looking forward to having a dialogue. But thank you for that comment, Sajad.
And the next question is from, I'll go back to David Reich. I think that was another one where we had technical difficulties. I'm going to unmute you now.
Thank you. I am here tonight representing Quincy Climate Action Network. And I would point out that you've already suggested that battery electric buses are quieter and they're emission free compared to the hybrids. And I'd also suggest if you want to minimize impact on the neighborhood, that would be an ideal choice, again, compared to the hybrids. I'm not sure we agree that the battery electric buses are would not work, given what Larry Cretion said about the ways to manage the range problems. But without arguing that issue, I would ask you to commit to reevaluating that choice between the hybrids and the battery electric buses in a couple of years when you're actually going to order that equipment, rather than making the choice now when you don't really know where the technology is going to be in a couple of years.
Yes, definitely, David. I think that, and one thing I want to just to build off of my earlier response to Larry, David, we're not necessarily saying that we need the battery electric bus technology to get to a point where we can deliver the same range that a diesel bus would deliver, or hit 140 mile range per day. I don't think we necessarily need to get to a 1-for-1 in that sense, because I think Larry's right, and I think other people are right that there are things we could probably do operationally to change the way we build our route and our pieces of work for our operators over the course of a day to kind of manage against that reality. But I think when you're talking about, our belief, our opinion is that when you're going from a range of 130 or 140 miles and you're losing that much capacity and you're going down to 30 or 40 miles a day on a cold day, I think that's just too much of a delta, I think, for us to be able to kind of cover operationally. I think it would really require us to kind of have a larger fleet to provide the same level of service, and we're not really in a position to do that right now. But the we are, the MBTA, I think, has not as bad as with our facilities, where a lot of these facilities like Quincy have been around for decades and decades. We are trying to regularize our bus our bus procurements. We used to kind of get to a point where the fleet was sort of across the board aging, and we'd go out and we'd buy 300 of them or 350 all at once, and then that would be great until 15 years later all of those would be getting old at the same time, right? So I think we're trying to move to a more regularized 100 bus per year procurement that gives us more regularity and more confidence in our kind of capital budgeting, that we know the dollars are going to be there, and it also makes sure that we're not we're not going to end up with a bunch of buses getting old all at the same time. So we're going to be in a constant cycle of vehicle procurement, and the T is, as it is now with these extended range hybrids, is going to be always looking to go to the cleanest option we can go for.
Great. So we've also been joined by Councillor Chuck Phelan from Ward 5, and I'm going to unmute you, Councillor, so that you can provide your comment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance. Chuck Phelan, Ward 5 City Councilor. The area that is in question is really, represented by Councilor Palmucci. I am actually behind the Lowe's and heading, if you're looking at the Lowe's, I start going to the right, and also the old bus bonds down on Hancock Street actually comes into my area. And I would support going to anything to go to the electrical and all that. I think that's very important to cut down on the pollution and noise that the residents in the area will see. One question I had is, I like that you've done the sidewalks and you're putting the sidewalks in. Who is going to maintain those in the winter? Are those going to be cleared by the MBTA? I know sometimes when people put in sidewalks, unless they're cleared in the winter, particularly from people walking from that back neighborhood over to the MBTA station across the street, will you be taking care of the opening of those sidewalks, making sure they're clear of snow and ice in the winter?
Yeah, so I think that the answer to that question, thank you, Councillor, for joining us tonight and that question. There's a lot of different, we talked about a lot of different kind of pedestrian features in the presentation earlier. There's the intersection improvements by DECO and by Quincy Adams that are going to be happening, in the next month. There's the new pedestrian connection coming across from the Columbia Street side of the neighborhood from Grasso Park. That's certainly a facility that the MBTA would be committing to, as well as the sidewalks on our side of the property. Then there are some other areas where I think there are complicated easements and ownership rights where it's not clear yet whose ultimate responsibility would be for snow removal. But that's part of the kind of ongoing conversations that we're having with the city of Quincy, as well as with some of the principal adjacent property owners, to make sure we get that right.
Okay, and we're gonna take one more question right now from the raised hands, and then we'll read a few off of the chat box because we've had quite a few come in. So Rob Kanata, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you now for your question.
Hi, I had just a question / comment, getting back to the hybrid electric versus the electric battery buses. Has the MBTA looked into en route charging as an option for transferring to an all electric fleet earlier? So for example, the STM in Montreal, they operate the 36 Monk line, which has been pretty successful, and it's colder there than it is here in the winter. And what makes it successful is that instead of running all day long on the battery, they have charging stations at the two termini of the route. And so they work that into sort of the scheduling. So for example, if you have a driver break, right, scheduled in, you put the bus under a charger, it charges up for a while. And if you put put that into your schedule, they get pretty good results with the buses that they've used so far. So I don't know if that's something the MBTA. So there's en route charging. There's also in motion charging, and you do have to install a little bit of infrastructure there. Installing chargers either along the route or at the terminal stations. But it does let you kind of hedge against the range problem probably earlier, right? And it might make it more feasible. I think Montreal, their goal is to go almost entirely to this by 2025. So I think that's a technology. Has the MBTA looked into that? Is that something that's in the discussion?
Yeah, it's certainly part of what we're looking at. One example is I know where, the way our bus system is designed is a little bit different than a lot of other cities, in that our bus service is primarily a feeder service to our rapid transit network. Rob, as I'm sure you're aware, and a lot of those rapid transit stations are designed to accommodate that. So there's usually big busways and layover space at those facilities, passenger facilities. So certainly on situations like that where there's MBTA property, we are in discussions about how we can also set up places like Quincy Center, for example, places like Forest Hills, places like Ashmont, to be able to have some of that charging capacity there, because we do oftentimes lay over at locations like that. I also think that we're only one of the entities out there that is looking at moving to electric vehicles. I think that's happening sort of across the transportation vehicle space, and certainly as more and more fleets convert and private automobiles convert, I think there's going to need to be sort of a region-wide thinking about how we build in the charging capacity necessary kind of across the region. So I think there are opportunities probably there to partner. Inductive charging, which you talked about, the in-motion charging, I think that's something that we're interested. We kind of pay attention to what's being presented out there and in journals and reported on that. But I think right now we're primarily focused on making sure we build this new facility to accommodate charging, overnight charging of a fleet of 120 to 135 buses, as well as having those initial discussions about what we could do at rapid transit stations. I don't know if we have our chief engineer on board, Eric Studoff. I don't know if Eric, if you wanted to add anything to that, I'll give you the opportunity here.
Hey, thanks, Scott, and thanks everybody for the questions about the facility and our electrifying of the bus network. We are certainly all of the comments about the electrifying of the bus network are aspects of our electrification study and the work that we're doing to consider our options for electrifying our bus network. All of these things come into the very multivariable evaluation for our bus network and our entire operation. And so, yes, inline charging is something that we are considering as we think about our fleet. We are thinking about what the continual evolution of bus technology is as we start to think about the next wave of buses that we purchase, and the wave after that, and the wave after that. So we are continually evolving our thinking based on what the industry is providing, what we know our capabilities are for supporting the service delivery that we have, the safety of the operation, and the comfort of our passengers. So any and all of these technologies are on the table for us to evaluate. We are trying to build these facilities, though, to have the greatest level of flexibility for the vehicles as they may evolve, and we have the ability to build the facilities and the fleet to be the cleanest, safest fleet that the MBTA can provide service on. Thank you. I'll hand it back over to Scott.
Thanks, Eric.
Great. So I'm going to take a look at the chat box. We have a question from Councillor Liang about the anticipated timeline for the project.
Thank you, Councillor. Right. So the current timeline that the MBTA has for the project would be to continue working through the design process. I mentioned that we're between 15 and 30% design right now, and then we would anticipate completing that design process in a little over a year, towards the end of 2021. In early 2022, we would target for the beginning of construction activities, and it would be a 30-month construction phase. So our goal would be to have the facility open in the middle of 2024. And at that point, the buses that we run out of Hancock Street today would be, the only buses we can run out of that facility would be 15 years old at that point. So they'd be starting to get into the age where we typically expect to start seeing reliability issues with them. So 2024 we feel like is a good year to target, so that we're not letting that fleet at Hancock Street get too far along.
Great. And then next we have several questions from listener Karen Cobb, and this listener has her hand raised, so I can go ahead and call on you if you'd like to articulate those questions, or just let me know if you'd like me to read out those questions. Karen, I'm unmuting you right now. Oh, I'll go ahead and read them out. Okay. So the first question is with regards to a handicap placard mandated parking spaces to make sure there's at least one wheelchair ramp accessible space per every 25 regular spaces.
Okay, so yeah, so as part of the, I'm assuming this question is about the employee parking area, or is it about the, I guess, do we know if this is about the interim?
I believe this is about the employee parking area.
Employee parking area, yeah. So the parking lot has been designed to meet all applicable standards in terms of handicap spaces. We've got, I don't know if I have the exact number. I'll sort of look to the team to see if they can. We have 235 spaces altogether, but do we know that we confirm the number of? I think what I'll do, Karen, is I'm asking the team just for that detail, and then as soon as I have it, I will let you know how many spaces will be handicap placard spaces in the facility.
And then just follow-up questions there to show the accessible paths of travel on the drawings. And the following question from Karen was, where are the EPA test study reports for noise and air pollution? If you want to just let people know about those being posted.
Right. So on the last point, yeah, the target is for us to file our federal and state environmental review documents within the month. So as soon as those are filed, we will post them, as well as the federal and state agencies posting documents on their websites for public review. We'll also be doing that on our Quincy Bus website. So I would encourage you, Karen, to come back and look for that there. That we have 5. I'm being told we have 5 kind of handicap spaces at the 235 parking facility. I think at this stage of design, it's not clear to me whether we have something to show you that would lay out that accessible path of travel that we could pull up on the screen that would demonstrate that. But I see Eric's camera is on. I don't know if Eric wanted to weigh in here.
Yeah, Scott, if I could.
Yep.
At the MBTA, I think everybody is aware that the MBTA is very much focused on making our system as accessible as we can, as quickly as we can. We are a legacy system. Our system, much of our system predates a lot of the codes and regulations that govern construction of the day today. But in addition to that, we are very committed to making our system accessible, and anything that we build new will be accessible. And so to the greatest extent possible, we will have paths of travel that meet all accessibility or perhaps even exceed accessibility standards. We will make sure that visitors to the building have accessible paths of travel within the building and to the building once onto the property that the MBTA builds. Part of what Scott was talking about in the presentation earlier about some of the sidewalks and crosswalks that we will be rebuilding, it is to provide an accessible path of travel across each intersection getting to our facility. So as people are coming down Bergen Parkway, for example, we're rebuilding the sidewalk in front of our facility, running along Bergen Parkway. That sidewalk will be accessible, and where we come up to the cross streets, we will make sure that both the end of the sidewalk where that crosswalk may intersect with our sidewalk that we're building as part of this, we'll make sure that the receiving crosswalk and curb ramp is also accessible. So we want to make sure that we have full accessibility to our facility. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay, the next, I see that we have, Counselor Mahoney has a question from the audience, so we'll go to that and then we'll keep working through the chat box. Counselor Mahoney, I'm gonna unmute you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we can. Thank you,
Okay.
Counselor.
So I apologize. I did join. I was on, but I was multitasking. I was having to do a college event for my daughter as well. So I have a couple of questions on the site. Have you already taken over the Lowe's site?
Yeah, so in the presentation I mentioned, Counselor, that back in May, we entered into a lease with New England Development. So we now have, the MBTA now has control of the site. As we had mentioned back in January, our intent is to use that for overflow parking for Quincy Adams. We can accelerate the reconstruction of that garage, and then also storage, at least for a few years, of capital spares from our Red and Orange Line car program, as well as other storage needs.
Okay, and then when is the anticipated date of purchasing the building, or do you have, is that 2024? Is that was the answer to Councilor Liang?
I think we'd want to have ownership of the site before 2024. That's, I mean, we would need to actually. We're looking to start construction at the beginning of 2022, so it would be well before that. We do need to wait until we complete our federal environmental review process before we can purchase the site. So the earliest we'd be able to purchase it would be the last quarter of this year. So I would say last quarter of this year or sometime in 2021, because we would be looking to start construction at the end of 2021.
And the last question that I had, and you may not have the answer to this, and it might have to go back to the city, but the city of Quincy was collecting taxes on that location from Lowe's, from the owner that was passed through Lowe's, of about $600,000. Do you know if that is something that's still happening, or was that something that was determined in the lease buyout?
I'm actually going to defer to Richard Henderson, our chief real estate officer, just to answer that question. I think I know the answer, but since Richard's here, I'll let him give it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So in the lease, we have actually taken over the payment of the taxes on the site, at least for the next several months.
Okay.
How the taxes work going forward will be subject to a process with the city. So for right now, we're paying the taxes.
Okay.
Also depends on when we take the site.
And what is the plan for the old location, the old bus depot location?
Scott, you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah. So right now, I mean, we're obviously focused on advancing the design and working through the process at the new site. We have, we need the Hancock Street facility until another facility opens that we can move that fleet to. So right now, our near-term focus on Hancock Street is just running that facility there and keeping that facility running. We're looking to make some short-term investments in it to make sure our workforce there is able to kind of continue to do their job over the next 3, 4, 5 years. We do not have any current plans for the site. Once we get to a point where we know we're ready to move the fleet over to the new facility, we'll sort of take stock of that facility and try to understand what role it could play in the T going forward, or whether the T no longer needs the facility and is open to kind of looking at other alternatives for it. But we certainly don't have any plans for the site now, other than continuing to operate it as a bus facility until we have a new one.
And when at the bus facility, or I guess it's when, because you've taken over the Lowe's site, the old site, the contamination of the old site, who will be in charge of cleaning that up prior to anybody else taking it over? Just curious, because I'd imagine there's a lot of contamination at that site as well.
So in a scenario where the T decided it no longer needed the facility and was going to put it out to bid, or is that the question? Yep. Or just Yeah, I guess I'd look again to Richard on that one. I don't know if you've been experienced in that disposition process in other places to kind of know what the answer would be. I'm not familiar enough with that step, Counselor.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't quite hear the question, actually. It was a bit garbled for me. Sorry.
That's okay. The question was, if you're no longer in use of the old facility and it was to, and you would sell it or it was to go to somebody else, who's in charge of would the MBTA be the ones who facilitate the cleanup, the environmental cleanup of that site prior to whatever use it gets used for? Because I would imagine there's a lot of contamination on that site.
Yeah, it would be subject to the particular approach that we take and what the deal would be, depending on how the disposition works. It could be potentially done by the MBTA, could be potentially done by a new owner. Partly the cleanup depends on what the future use is.
I understand. I just want to make sure that's understood, because I think there's plans for that site, or the city has articulated ideas for that site. So I want to make sure that's something that the city of Quincy is not going to end up paying for. In a separate question, there were a lot of things that came up in the January meeting. In particular, there was some abutters that were concerned, businesses that were concerned, neighbors that were concerned. Have all those? And I apologize again, I was late to come on. I just want to make sure that were all of those addressed, and have you met with this particular business owner that I think was going to be impacted? Has that been something that's been dealt with?
Yeah, so the way we had structured the presentation, Counselor, was to try to highlight what those issues were that came up in January, and then sort of run through them and give an update or try to answer questions that we weren't able to answer before. So hopefully we did a good job with that. But again, this is, we're in early days, and we're certainly available to kind of continue the dialogue with the community. The property owner, I believe you're referencing from the January meeting, was the Caniff Monument business to the north of the site. So if you recall, at that meeting, I think which had occurred sort of before we'd been successfully able to kind of sit down with them, although both sides have been trying to kind of meet before that meeting. I think we heard that our proposed access road was likely to be it was going to be a significant impact on that business and make it difficult for them to stay there. And one of the first things we did when we sort of finished that meeting that evening was talked internally about really trying to kind of sharpen our pencils and figure out there was another way to provide that necessary secondary access to our facility, but doing so in a way that would minimize the impacts to that property owner. So we presented our revised plan for the Columbia Street extension, which would serve as that new access point for the site for us, and we minimized that down to as little as we think we could get away with to put that road in. And those conversations with the property owner are ongoing right now. There's no specifics I can report to you on how they feel about those changes, but we've shared those with them, and we are in active discussions with them. And this might be a good point, Counselor, just rather than have my email address up there for the whole time, to just have, maybe this is a better slide to sit on, because some of the questions coming up, I think, are about access and circulation.
And we also have a question in the chat box from Counselor Palmucci about the next steps in community input process and whether it's feasible to put together a working group of area residents to work directly with the T on this project.
Okay, so that was the question. So Counselor, okay, that was the question. Okay, I was waiting for Counselor Palmucci's voice.
The hand was not raised, but I can unmute. I will go ahead and unmute the.
Yeah. So I think we're definitely looking to engage here. I think when we came out of the meeting that you had posted back in January, which was great, and I appreciate you creating that space for us to come out and talk about what our plans were at the site. I think we're interested in continuing in the engagement process with the community. We had at the time said we wanted to come out and meet with even if it's smaller groups of folks to talk about the impacts in a more localized way. That we're happy to do that. I think there can be pros and cons to a working group approach, but I'm happy to kind of have that conversation with you, Counselor, offline with my team, and really talk about the best way to kind of engage with the community. I don't know if is he unmuted now?
Yeah, that answers my question. I appreciate that. I just seeing these slides for the first time tonight, I see some issues that I think some area neighbors would want to to work with you guys through to make sure we minimize any negative impact. So I appreciate that response, and I will connect with you after the meeting and try to put something together with some folks. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Counselor. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Counselor. The next attendee that I'd like to call on, who also submitted the question in the chat box, is Robert Kearns. Robert, I'm going to unmute you. Robert, you're self-muted, so I can't unmute you. There we go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hey, Robert.
Hi, Robert Kearns with the Sierra Club Massachusetts chapter. I echo some previous speakers, including Larry Churchin and others. The Sierra Club Massachusetts chapter believes that the MBTA must be more aggressive at procuring and putting zero-emission electric buses into service. These are proven technologies, like Larry and others have said. Having these electric buses will reduce the noise and air quality impacts on the abutters in neighborhoods, as well as local EJ communities like the Fall River Basin in Quincy, Braintree, and Weymouth that are overburdened with air pollution, as these buses have no tailpipe emissions and are quieter. Over 450 Sierra Club members and supporters living in the area serviced by MBTA bus routes submitted comments urging MBTA to commit to electric bus purchases this fiscal year and all future procurements. At a time when this pandemic is deepening long-standing health and transportation inequities, it is critical that the MBTA stop investing in fossil fuel technologies and commit to buying all electric bus fleet in fiscal year 2021 and beyond. It's not enough for the T to say that they're working towards electrification without committing to a clear timeline and phased public plan to reach this goal. And we ask, and my question is there any ability the MBTA could, with this proposal, commit to having these buses in the facility and operating, as well as commit to speeding up the process of building this facility in order to be able to have these buses on the road?
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, so I think the MBTA is interested in moving as quickly as we can, both with this facility and with a conversion to battery electric bus technology. With this facility, as I mentioned earlier, the clock really is ticking on our Hancock Street facility, so we're as motivated as anyone in trying to move this thing forward. But it's a process that takes time. It takes a lot of coordination with stakeholders. It's not something we can expedite. We don't believe much faster than the current targeted opening date of mid-2024, and that's the easiest answer as to why the MBTA is not currently procuring buses. Which once we enter into a contract to buy buses, we can have buses kind of arriving on site, within a year. So we don't have a facility to put any battery electric buses right now. We've got 5 pilot buses at Southampton Garage. For a small number like that, we can squeeze them in. We can figure out how to get the charging capability in there and infrastructure. But for an entire garage fleet, we're not in a position to accept vehicles like that yet. And like I said, this range issue is a real one right now with the technology. We're optimistic that it is going to continue to improve, and that it won't be too far beyond 2024 where we'll be able to begin bringing on battery electric buses in large numbers. But certainly in the near term, if we're going to be looking at a reduction of 60-70% of kind of per charge mileage capacity, we're just not in a position to kind of commit to opening this facility that way, because even at this expanded 120, 135 bus fleet, we wouldn't be able to accommodate a fleet large enough to allow us to continue to run the service we run today at those kind of numbers. But again, we think our commitment to move forward with our first major bus facility construction in a generation as a fully committed battery electric bus ready facility is a statement of the authority's commitment to this. This is not a $0 add-on to the project to make this facility battery electric bus capable. We think that is a strong statement. Certainly, we've had higher level policy documents like the MBTA's Focus 40 plan that have identified a commitment to moving the MBTA to zero emissions vehicles on the bus fleet. So we have made statements to that effect. And really the only thing holding us back now is just making sure that when we make that step to go to this new technology, that we're able to kind of continue to provide the service we provide today to our customers.
I'm going to go back to a question from the chat box. Does this plan anticipate that the northern section of Penn Street, north of Caniff, will remain closed, dead-end street as it currently is from ML?
Yeah, so our number one priority with the new connection at Columbia Street Extension to our facility is to make sure we're not creating an opportunity for cut-through traffic. We know that when the Lowe's building itself was, when that property was assembled and the Lowe's building was built a decade or so ago, we know that was a big concern for that section of Penn Street, as well as the whole neighborhood on that side. We're certainly not looking to create a problem there. We do need to provide access for ourselves and the two adjacent commercial properties. And I think we're interested in working with the residents of that section of Penn Street, the city of Quincy, the two commercial properties, to try to figure out the best way to manage access to that roadway. In the graphic that I showed you earlier, we showed that as sort of signs that said authorized vehicles only. Obviously signs are, they're not going to do a lot without enforcement, and oftentimes something of a physical nature is needed to really prevent cut-through traffic. So I think we're interested in sitting down in a smaller group, similar to what Councilor Palmucci had recommended, and maybe sitting down with residents on that stretch and working with the city and the adjacent property owners to figure out the best solution so that we're not creating a new problem for residents here.
Okay, and there's another question from the chat box from Nathaniel, who also has their hand raised. I'll unmute and see if you would like to ask that question. Nathaniel, you're self-muted. There we go.
Hi, thank you. My name is Nathaniel, and I'm commenting as a MBTA bus and train rider, and I have sort of 2 or 3 questions, so I'll let you answer the first one before I move on. But the building design looks great, looks very cool, and I wonder if there's any provisions for public tours in the new facility.
So, Nathaniel, are you going to ask you were going to ask multiple questions at once, or do you want me to take them in turn? Is that
the second question is a little bit longer, so I think this one's a shorter answer.
Yeah, so it predates my experience at the T to have a new bus facility open. I see no reason why we wouldn't, before we turned on the facility and opened it, that we wouldn't give the community and other interested parties an opportunity to see it. But it's been a while since we built one of these, and I'm not as young as I used to be, but I'm not old enough to have been at one of those ribbon cuttings. But here's Eric, who's also not that old, so maybe he has the answer.
Yeah. So in short, yes, we absolutely want to bring the public through the bus facility to give a tour of what this looks like. We are hopeful that this is something that we are going to shout from the rooftops, that we have built this fabulous facility, and it can be something that the MBTA, the city of Quincy, the whole region can be proud to say the MBTA built and is part of our infrastructure and our network. I'll stop short of saying we hope it's an award winner, just because that comes with some added costs. But certainly, if we can make this an award-winning, whether it's LEED or other Envision style award-winning facilities, we want this to be something that is cover of magazine worthy, and we want to show it off to industry professionals and the community alike.
Great.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you. Do you mind if I ask the second question now, or did you want to follow up?
Yeah, no, go ahead, Nathaniel.
Yeah, thank you. The building looks great, and so I hope you do show it off. So I'll state that most people I've heard are commenting as concerned neighbors or environmentalists or both, but as a bus rider, the most critical thing is that the MBTA operations are reliable and frequent, and that's sort of the biggest environmental benefit of all. So I hope the concerns about the electrifying the fleet don't delay this project or something, because that's the most benefit that can be done for the environment. And segueing that into a question, we always hear that these facilities have outgrown their size. So I'm curious if the MBTA has identified when they plan to reach capacity of this new facility, acknowledging that it hasn't even gone into construction. And also if it's being designed for expansion in the future so that in 30 years, they won't also have to outgrow this facility and go through the same process. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, thank you, Nathaniel. That's a good question. Yeah, you've certainly hit on what's been a real problem for the T for as long as I've been working here, which is, we don't have any room to store and maintain a significant number of new buses. So that's not an issue in the middle of the day. It's not an issue late at night. It's an issue when most people are trying to use our services, when the highest number of people are trying to use our services during the rush hours. And we've got basically, every bus that we can spare to put out there kind of in service during rush hours. So the real, it's not the only barrier to providing more bus service. We need to hire more operators, and we need to have the operating budget to be able to run them. But certainly facilities are a barrier to that. The Quincy facility at 86 buses, I mentioned in the presentation, we think the ideal of the peak efficiency of this facility will be if we're running 120 buses out of it. That is somewhere around, I'm just doing the math in my head while I'm on camera here, but I think that's somewhere around a 40%, 35 to 40%, increase in capacity above what we have at Quincy. I think as part of the bus modernization program, we're always going to be looking to try to grow our facilities by 30%. That's kind of a target that we're working with internally to make sure we at least hit that. Just due to the nature of the site and where the building kind of has to fit between the Town Brook Culvert and Bergen Parkway, we think that we could potentially get to 135 in this facility, which is an even greater increase in capacity above and beyond what Quincy has today. So we think if we, even with the 120, we'll probably open with, or the 135 that we think is the max for this facility, and which, by the way, is the number we're using in all of our environmental review documents. So that we're permitting this for its maximum potential capacity. We think that gives the Quincy service quite a bit of room to grow and meet future demand. I mentioned earlier that the Quincy facilities a little bit more local than a lot of our other bus facilities. It's really serving those routes that are kind of radiating out of Quincy Center and serving Quincy residents. And we think we've got a lot of growth built in there for Quincy.
Okay, another question that came in on the chat box from Felix Lau is, 4 traffic counts you showed in the slides, are those traffic counts recorded during the COVID-19 pandemic? If so, the traffic counts won't be accurate.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, so those traffic counts were taken last summer. They were taken July and August of 2019. So they were taken well in advance of COVID-19. And when we're comparing, and again, as I mentioned when we went over the traffic analysis, when we're comparing that to our use of the site, again, to be conservative, we assumed that 135 bus capacity of the facility was maxed out, and that we were running service with that size of a fleet. So we didn't want to undercount. We didn't want to make it look like we were, saying we had 120 buses worth of employees and mechanics and operators and buses, and then we're permitting it for 135. So we, again, even though we think 120 is a much more likely place for us to open with at this facility, we did the traffic analysis based on a larger number of traffic movements on site, resulting from 135 buses. But the traffic counts did predate COVID.
And another question from a member of the audience who has left, but I'll ask it just for the benefit of the audience, from Joan Falve. Any thoughts on a pedestrian bridge versus a crosswalk? That seems it would better suit traffic flow on the Bergen Parkway and prevent pedestrian fatalities trying to cross Bergen on foot.
Yeah, I think, and I, I'm kind of pulling back from just this facility. I think in general, I think in general, we're trying to keep pedestrian activity in a lot of our projects kind of on the ground, and not try to take pedestrians out of out of the sidewalk space, out of the street space. We've got folks that are coming from the Deco apartments, coming from Columbia Street, employees coming to and from our facility. It's a much more direct and it's a much faster pedestrian connection if they're just crossing Bergen Parkway at grade. So I think it's our responsibility. It's the responsibility of the folks that are managing and maintaining these roadways. It's our responsibility to make those crossings safer for pedestrians, not to build new infrastructure to kind of take them out of the traffic, which will only result in even faster traffic and less safe conditions for the pedestrians that are forced to remain at that level, as well as add sort of time and inconvenience to the pedestrians who are trying to cross over. So I think the right solution is to make this as safe of a crossing as we can for pedestrians. And I'd like to think we should approach it more from that angle.
Okay, there is another question from ML regarding the stadium lights that were added to the Quincy Adams garage. I'm not going to read out the whole thing just for brevity, but would it be possible as a courtesy to folks in the Deco apartments to lower those lights to reduce the light pollution pointed west towards the Deco apartment and northward to the neighborhood towards Caniff?
That question sounds like it's specifically about, so as far as lighting on our side, I think we're early enough in the design process that I'm not sure we have much to report or much that we can kind of give you examples of what that's going to look like. But it's definitely an issue that we know is going to be one of interest to the community, and one that we'll work with the community to keep you informed on and get your feedback. As far as Quincy Adams Station itself, I would probably look to Eric if he wants to say anything about that. I'm not as familiar with the operations and the facilities at Quincy Adams Station.
All right, so thanks for the question. We will certainly bring back to the capital team that's working on the project at Quincy Adams. I'm not specifically familiar with this concern. I don't know if it's part of permanent lighting at the station or garage, or if it's part of the construction lighting so that the contractor has adequate light to perform their duties. One of the many concerns that have been raised by our ridership over the years has been lighting concerns at our parking facilities and on our stations. And it is an area where we are focusing on safety and what adequate lighting does for the safety of our passengers and the accessibility of our passengers at our facilities. That said, we will certainly bring back to the team, and we will have our maintenance teams and our capital teams look at what kind of light spillage there is, and if there's something that we can do to try and focus those lights to reduce light spread and light pollution, to be more focused on the highest and best need for that lighting, which is the safety of our passengers and the safety of the operation at the garage.
Thank you, Eric. And I think just since we have him on the call today, so Lou Rubito is one of our team members from Jacobs Engineering that's helping support the MBTA on this project. And again, we're early days in terms of our kind of lighting plan for our facility. But since Lou's here, I guess I would invite him if he can get on and just share kind of what the thinking is right now and how far we are into the design process on lighting at the actual bus facility.
Thank you, Scott. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
So the lighting for the facility, we've kind of looked at, kind of broke it up into two areas. One is the lighting for the parking area, and the other one is the lighting for the path from Grosso Park to Deco and then onto Quincy Adams Station. So for the lighting in the parking lot area, we've tried to provide roughly 2 to 3 foot candles of lighting for the parking area. And right now, which is adequate lighting for this area and meets current lighting standards. And then for the section from Grosso Park to Deco and then on to Quincy Adams, we're proposing low pedestal lighting or bollard lighting to light the path. And lastly, there'll be lighting also from the building, from the proposed bus facility that'll be provided along the sidewalk that's shown in blue, lighting for the sidewalk area to the building. Thank you.
Thanks, Lou.
Okay, so a couple more questions in from the chat box. Two from Jocelyn Sedney. The first one, will buses be equipped with ability to automatically interfere with signals such as that a bus approaches, the signal turns green for the bus and stops ongoing traffic?
Thanks, Jocelyn. So the MBTA has been working over the MBTA has been doing a lot of work over the last few years to really try to elevate the experience of bus customers once they're out on our system riding buses. You may be familiar, I don't think anything has happened in Quincy on this front yet, but you may be familiar with some of the investments in bus lanes that a lot of our cities and towns we run service in have been making to try to take buses out of on-street congestion. That's had been a big improvement for the travel time and reliability of those routes, and something our customers universally have liked. There's another part to that improving operations, which is working with the signal systems on those roadways and coordinating bus movements with those signals. What the T has been working on in the last few years is trying to advance transit signal priority. So that basically is a communication system primarily in effect with the city of Boston in certain corridors today, where essentially our control center for the MBTA overseeing the bus operation can communicate with the city's traffic control center. And when we have a bus that is running behind schedule, it's able to communicate with the city's signal system and request that a green get held a little bit longer, so the bus could sort of make the make the signal or request a shorter red cycle. So that's called transit signal priority. It sounds like, Jocelyn, your question is talking about an even more aggressive treatment, which is transit signal preemption, and that would be effectively similar to the situation that commuter rail trains get when they come to a grade crossing out in the suburbs, or even in places like Chelsea or Medford, where that vehicle is getting the green light essentially every time it shows up at a railroad street crossing. So transit signal preemption is not something that the T has implemented yet. To my knowledge, we are working, however, with a lot of our municipal partners to try to advance transit signal priority, which we think is a good first step towards what you're describing.
And so the next question from Jocelyn, and I'm going to combine it with a couple other questions, is about the visual look of the building and the site, and what's the building, is visible and large, and what are the efforts being made in terms of design to be creative with the attractiveness of the building, and then whether or not there will be, what other green features there will be, including a green question about a green roof, which would positively impact the environment. And there are several other questions in the chat box about the landscaping around the site. So maybe we can address all of those questions together.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great point in our process to get those kind of comments from the community. As Eric Studhoff mentioned a few minutes ago, we are hoping that this project can qualify for recognition through LEED or Envision, a couple of programs that recognize sort of excellence in sustainability and environmentally friendly design and facilities. We are, in terms of materials, we're really at the point in the process where we've started to have those meetings, which up until now have been really focused on the flow of our vehicles and the maintenance function inside the building, and then the broader site plan. We're starting to really talk about materials and sustainability at the facility level. So it's a great time to get those comments. The renderings we showed, again, were primarily to give a sense of scale and the kind of design that we're kind of aiming for. I think both Eric and myself have as we've said earlier on the meeting today, we're looking to do this across our whole bus network. We've got 9 facilities. All of them need significant reinvestment, if not relocation. And we want to get this first one right. So this one's going to be a model. We want it to be a model sort of architecturally for what the other ones will look like. We want it to be a model in terms of process and working with the community. And certainly we want it to be a model for sustainable design. Because even though we're clearly, we're clearly looking to transition to the most sustainable type of power systems for our buses that we can possibly have. And we're trying to provide more transit service, which is a very environmentally friendly thing. We know it's important that we do everything we can with the building as well. With the caveat that Eric said that some treatments can get a little bit more expensive. So we're not quite at a point yet where we can kind of commit to a full menu of sustainable design treatments, but the timing for the comment is good.
And just a note that there were other questions about solar on the roof. Maybe some
Right.
time to
So
address those.
yeah. So at this point, our plan for the roof is to design the roof to be solar ready. So it'll be ready to accept solar panels and equipment on the roof, rather than having the MBTA build that and maintain that. It's a cleaner exercise for us if we make the building solar ready and then sort of put that opportunity out to bid to the private sector. So that's our current thinking with the facility. We anticipated having solar, just not solar that'll be sort of MBTA owned and maintained.
Okay. Another question from David Lasquito. What's the plan at the corner of Columbia and Tabor? I know there will be no access from the parking lot, but will Columbia and Tabor still be disconnected?
Yeah, so right now the sort of limits of our project don't, and I think we're talking about there's sort of two, I believe there's two kind of barriers as you get down to that end of Columbia. I think there's a metal swing gate, and then I think there's also something that's more of like planters or even a Jersey barrier type of a barrier at the end there. So our project limits are not including that end of the site. So there's no plan for us to reopen that connection as part of that, as part of this project.
Taking a look at the additional questions. John Flynn, do you want to ask your question verbally? You're self-muted. Inattentive. Okay. We will move forward then. From Ray Tatvasis, along the walkway besides the parking lot, Columbia Street to Deco, one side is the pretty fence and the parking lot, and the other side is a wild forest. Will there be a grass buffer that'll make it look more park-like?
Yeah, so I guess on that question, and I might ask Lou to get ready to kind of build off of this. I think what you see in the renderings again was something that we put together that we thought would be helpful for people to understand how this all fits together and looks from the community perspective. But don't want to suggest that sort of width of walkway and relationship on either end is exactly how things will kind of ultimately look. And we are, as I said, sort of between 15 and 30% design. So we still have a lot of work to do to flesh out these ideas. I don't know, Lou, if you're still with us, do you want to talk a little bit about what the current dimensions and thinking is for that pathway?
Sure, Scott. Yeah, right. So right now there is, as you mentioned, really the driveway, the parking lot's on one side, and we do have that wide sidewalk. As of right now, we're showing really just the wall on what would be the south side, so generally along where the resource area is, and then on the other side it would be a fence. We can look at, as we continue to move the design forward, we can certainly look at widening that and providing a grass buffer. To really provide an effective buffer, we probably need to get something in the order of 3 to 4 feet, so something can be maintained. But it's certainly something we can continue to look at as we progress with the design. Thank you.
Okay, now we'll go back to John Flynn. I'm going to unmute you now. John, make sure to unmute yourself as well. Okay. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you, John.
Hi, this is Jay Flynn from Transit Matters. I'm the bus lead for Transit Matters. And you mentioned earlier that you're looking at en route charging, but you've made no steps to actually test en route charging. And we have a problem with that at Transit Matters because our feeling is the only kind of bus you're testing is the kind of bus that is least usable in our climate. We have existing wiring in the Cambridge, Watertown, Arlington area, which there are no plans to our knowledge for you to utilize to potentially test in motion charging. And Quincy, for example, is probably the single best example of a good place to put en route charging because you could put a whole bunch of chargers in Quincy Center Station and charge many lines off of there. And I'm wondering why you haven't already started testing either en route or in motion charging, and do you have any plans to do so?
Yeah, we certainly will, Jake. I think the answer to that is really that whatever our mix of charging strategies are going to be, and I think it will be a mix. It will not be exclusively overnight in facility charging. I think it's going to have to be a mix of a lot of the things that you and other attendees have mentioned. But certainly we're in no position to support a battery electric bus fleet that is only getting charged out in the service unless we're kind of recreating an overhead catenary system like we have in the Cambridge and Watertown routes. We're going to need to have facilities at Quincy Center and at Alewife and Malden Center and all of those big bus hubs, but we're not going to be able to support a battery electric bus fleet at those places alone. We're going to need to significantly rebuild our facilities, and we can kind of do it halfway and try to create space in another garage to do a little bit of charging for a small portion of the fleet, or we can take the strategy the MBTA is taking, which is committing to converting all 9 of its facilities to battery electric bus over time, starting with Quincy, moving as quickly as we can with Quincy, and as quickly as we can move with Quincy is probably still going to put the MBTA ahead of the technology in terms of being able to be supported even with en route charging and overnight charging. So I think the MBTA is exploring opportunities and evaluating different strategies here, and I think we're doing it in the logical sequence of steps, focusing on what the critical first steps are in this analysis.
Okay, we are at about 7:10. There are a few other questions, 3 of which are from Robert Kearns, who I think had a question earlier. I can unmute you, Robert, if you'd like to speak those questions. And one of those is also a question that other folks have about bus rapid transit and transit priority in Quincy. So Robert, I'll go ahead and unmute you in case you want to speak.
Thank you. My follow-up was, can you look into committing to having the zero-emission buses when you open the facility? That was one of them. And then the other one was, are you looking into transit signal priority on Bergen Parkway and other routes in Quincy? I think that'd be great, especially with the traffic.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. So on that second question, I think that's a really good point. I think when we started looking at bus lanes at the MBTA and transit signal priority, we really tried to focus on where the sort of passenger volumes were highest. We felt like that gave us the strongest argument in kind of working with either stakeholders who weren't interested in some of the choices that were required in order to make those investments, as well as bringing our municipal partners along. I think that it has been something we've been talking about internally at the T recently, is that we shouldn't only be thinking of those places where we have high volumes of bus passengers riding our buses to make these types of improvements. We should also be thinking about the access, to and from our facilities, because that's ultimately where all these bus trips are starting or at our facilities. So I think that's a conversation that I think we're happy to engage with the city of Quincy on. And I think that's a really good suggestion. As far as the other question about a commitment to opening with battery electric buses, I would just say, Robert, the MBTA we're really committed to kind of running a cleaner bus fleet tomorrow than we run today, and always getting cleaner. And we think we're going to be doing that clearly by virtue of opening this facility, which will on day one have a significant improvement in the types of vehicles we're operating in Quincy. Even if it's an extended range diesel hybrid that may fall short of battery electric bus technology. We think we're demonstrating that commitment by designing and building a facility that is going to be able to accommodate battery electric bus technology once it's ready. And then our other big commitment that we need to make is just being able to commit that we can provide a quality service to our bus passengers. And we feel like creating a new facility that gives our workforce the best conditions in which to maintain and operate our vehicles will help us get there. We think allowing Quincy to get bus service operated on newer vehicles is a big way to get there. And then the additional capacity we've got here allows us to meet demand. So we think those are the commitments that are really important to us. We want to get cleaner. We want to be able to continue to provide service to our customers and improve that service. I think we're hitting both of those commitments, but a specific commitment about a specific date that we'd have battery electric buses here. I think we're doing everything we can on our side, and we're waiting for the battery technology to get there so that we can do it without impacting our service.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to the audience, a couple of final hand raises, and then we will talk about next steps. I think we've addressed most all the questions in the chat box. Faye, I wanted to check and see if you had a question. I apologize, your hand has been up for a while. Faye, do you have a question or a comment?
No. I put it in the chat and you answered.
Great.
Thank you.
And then Irene, you had raised your hand recently. I'm going to unmute you now. And I believe you had also provided a question via the email, so feel free to ask that verbally now, or we can also address your question from the email in addition to any other question you have. And make sure to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you so much. Yes, I just wanted to ask, because I arrived a little late. I don't know if it had been addressed, but you've accommodated pedestrian access from the neighborhood through that sidewalk path, but there is no indication that there will be bicyclist access through the facility. And the existing parking lot provides a very low stress route for cyclists to access the MBTA station, either to ride the train or to move through the station at the new Independence Ave gate to access other places by cycling. So is there a plan to make that into a shared use path as opposed to just a sidewalk? I'm not sure if you're aware, Quincy has an ordinance that prohibits bicycling on sidewalks. So if it is just a sidewalk, it won't be an accessible route for bicyclists.
Yeah, so this, so Irene, thanks for the comment. So this pathway that we show on the site plan, let me just move my webcam out of the way so I can see it in red here. So this is going to be on our property, and so we can operate it sort of how we want to operate it. And I think our intent is for this to be a combined shared use bicycle pedestrian friendly pathway. So that's how we're envisioning this connection in red coming through. Obviously, at some point, either in today's condition, if a cyclist is crossing the parking lot, or in our future, at some point, those bikes do need to either be on a sidewalk or they need to kind of drop down onto actual Penn Street. So where our extension of this pathway ties in with Deco, I think it's then it becomes less of a question that we can kind of answer definitively, but yeah, we're making that accommodation for both bicycles and pedestrians.
Okay, and we had a couple of additional questions come in via email. I'll just pull those up for Scott to take a look at. Do you want me to read them out loud?
Yeah, why don't you read that out loud, and then that's good. Yeah.
Okay, so one question from an abutter regarding noise and air mitigation process. What is that process going to be? Whether or not there'll be vibration monitors set up to monitor the foundations of homes during the construction. Thirdly, will the traffic control process what will the traffic control process be during construction? Will there be construction during the overnight hours of the week, and will there be trucks and work? Will the trucks and work enter the property? Where will the trucks enter the property? And then fourth, the beautification mitigation process for abutters on Columbia Street, including noise control using fencing and trees and greenery. So
okay, great. Yeah, so a couple things. So I guess I would just, and I apologize for not looking directly at folks because I'm looking over at the screen here. But so as we mentioned on the noise and air quality analysis slide, so the project does not sort of meet the threshold of requiring air quality mitigation. And as I said, we did that analysis conservatively by assuming the diesel hybrid fleet that would be used at this facility upon opening, rather than the cleaner battery electric buses that we would be moving to later on in the future. On the noise side, I think that there's the noise analysis did not show a significant impact. The one thing we do acknowledge that we need to work on is the electric substation transformer out on Bergen Parkway. We will be working to make that fit in aesthetically with the neighborhood as best we can, look for opportunities to kind of take advantage of some space we have on either end of it to kind of shield it with some green space and some features, design it in a way that's not, that's as inoffensive as possible, but then also to make sure we're managing whatever noise outputs come out of that. So those are all things we're committed to working on. I know there was another one in there. In terms of like in construction mitigation, I don't know if Eric's still with us, if he wanted to take any of those questions about the actual construction phase of the project, whether it's the sort of traffic control, noise monitoring being set up for home foundations. What maybe Eric, if you're able to talk about some of the standard MBTA approaches with construction.
Sure. So we do have processes by which we do what's called a pre-construction site survey of abutting facilities or buildings to work with those owners to do a pre-construction survey to understand what the condition of foundations are and monitor those as the construction proceeds. If this site requires any kind of deep foundations in the form of piles and pile driving, we would work with the city on what that type of construction activity would look like in terms of the time of day, and really make sure that we're communicating well with the community on when the start and end of that activity would happen by both time of day and time of year. I think there was also a question in there, Alexandra, about construction vehicles and time of day construction. With the site being the way it is and where there is no current, where there would not be current MBTA activities on the site, I would think it would follow fairly similar construction activities in terms of time of day activity, but we're a little bit away from some of that type of work. There could be activities within the construction that requires some level of continuous work. I can't think of one off the top of my head right now, but there would be construction vehicles like concrete delivery trucks and asphalt delivery trucks that would need to come in. There is certainly going to be cranes that are needed for picking large pieces of steel and erecting structural elements for the skeleton of the building, and then picking heavy equipment. So some of those things may come down to time of day based on delivery of those pieces because of size and weight restrictions based on traffic concerns along the approaching roadways to the site. Scott, I think I answered many of those questions, but if there's something I missed, please let me know.
Yeah, no, I think you got it, Eric. Thank you. And I think so I'm looking over to Alexander. I think we've got a couple more of the hands up feature to answer. And then it does look like we're kind of getting to the end of questions, at least questions that we haven't already addressed earlier on. So I'll just giving folks a heads up if they do have other questions, get those in soon, because it looks like we're coming down to the end here. So Alexander, do you want to?
So Claire Sullivan, I saw your hand is up, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. There we go.
Hi, my name's Claire Sullivan. I'm a mechanic, and I'm here with another owner. And we have still having problems with what is going on with the MTA in our property. And we had an on-site visit where they told us the new plan about taking 1/3 of our property. But we've got a bigger problem that I don't know how we're going to get an 18-wheeler in there with our granite. I mean, you're making a road for yourself, but we always had access through Lowe's. We had an easement through Lowe's to get that truck into our property and out. Now that's, I don't know what you propose to do about that. It can't get through Penn Street. That's why when we sold that easement to Lowe's, that was the stipulation that they come through Lowe's property and that gate in the back. So we had access to open it, close it.
So Claire, we had met, I think after the meeting in January. So good to hear from you again. I know that Jamie Rush and our real estate team have been in discussions with you. I think where I would just, on behalf of them, I would say, I think we're happy to come out with our team and sit down with you, looking at some drawings and plans, and to sort of make sure we understand your operations and what your needs are and the types of vehicles, and to make sure that you're still going to be able to obviously access your property. So that's something that if it hasn't already been offered, offering it now. And I guess I'd look to, Richard, if you wanted to jump in. I know it's been I think it's been Jamie Rush that's been the primary point of contact with you and the family, Claire, but certainly MBTA is happy to come out and sit down with you and try to understand your concerns and try to answer some questions. I see Richard's joining.
Yes, Claire will be happy to come and meet with you with the engineering team. It sounds like it's really an engineering turning radius type of question to understand how we can get your needs met as we progress with the design. So we're happy to have that meeting.
Oh, thank you, Richard. I don't know if that was it for Claire. If Claire, and Claire certainly, reach out to me directly or to Jamie to set that up, and we want to obviously keep the dialogue going.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's one of the issues, but that's going to be a big issue. I mean, we're losing enough money by property you're taking, and we got so much granite there. I mean, this could be $1 million problem.
Yeah, I think sorry. If
we can't get our granite in, we're out of business. We've been in business 124 years. 1896, we've been in business. And I don't know why. I mean, all the properties around I don't know, at the January meeting, we weren't given any answer to other properties that you looked at. And they were thrown that question like 5 different times and no one could answer them. What other properties you people looked at?
It's okay.
Yeah, Gabe.
Yeah, no, and I think one of the clear, one of the clear directions coming out of that meeting, Claire, internally was to, as I said during the presentation, I don't know if you were here during the presentation, but to do whatever we could to minimize that impact on Caniff. So we have made, we have made some changes to our plan to try to minimize the amount of property that we would need from you and from Caniff, and certainly don't want to stop there. We want to sit down with you, make sure we understand what your needs are, and have our engineering team sit down with you and try to work through that with you to make sure you're able to still access your business. So we're definitely committing to that.
Yeah. Now, the road that you're going to be using to come in, right?
Off of Bergen.
That's a one-way off Bergen Parkway?
So there'd be 2 access points to the facility. We sort of need that redundancy for a couple different reasons, but that there's going to be the entrance that's the primary Lowe's entrance today, which I think is the entrance where your larger trucks would come in, right, Claire, from the Lowe's entrance at Coffee Adams.
Yes.
Right, and then there'd be a secondary point of access that we'd be creating that would be right, at our property line and then into Caniff, and that would be tying up into Columbia Street extension over by the plumbing.
Columbia Street?
So Columbia Street is the street that is along the fence line of the Lowe's parking lot, and then is sort of between the Lowe's property and the Sullivan Plumbing Supply, and then it ends today sort of right in front of your property where Penn Street comes together, right where the gate, sort of in that little section where the gate and Penn Street is where Columbia Street ends. So we'd be looking to create a new access there that would actually straighten Columbia Street out, so it wouldn't come into Penn at that angle. It would kind of be a perpendicular connection to Bergen Parkway.
Would that be a throughway?
So that would be a road that would be for authorized vehicles only. It would be bi-directional, so vehicles could come off of Bergen or go onto Bergen from it. But the intent is for us to work with the city, work with you, and work with the other commercial property owner as well as the residents of Penn Street to figure out the way to design that so that the only people able to access it are going to be destined to the MBTA facility, the plumbing supply facility, or your property. And then we want to make sure it doesn't become a through street for people trying to avoid congestion at Bergen Parkway and coming down off of Liberty or Water Street or whatever to get over to Bergen Parkway.
And how would our customers come in? The same way now?
So your customers today probably come down Penn Street. Is that right? Do they come down Penn from?
Come down Penn from, like the gas station,
Right. Yeah. So I mean, that would be, they would still be able to do that. I guess we need to work with the city to understand how we are managing access at that junction point. I think that's a good question, Claire, and we need to in a world where they were not able to do it the way they do it today by coming down Penn Street, they would be able to do it coming off of Bergen Parkway. They would just, we need to design it in a way so that if your customers need to get there or your suppliers need to get there, they can, but we don't want people using it as a cut through for traffic.
Right. Now one more question. If we can get our trucks in there, there's no way they can turn around to get out.
Yeah. Again, I think this is really because this was a modification right from January in our thinking, and I think we recognize that there need to be more conversations, and I think Jamie or I will be in touch with you, and we very much want to come out and sit down with you and go over truck turning radii and understand your operations and the type of vehicles you've got to accommodate so that we can figure out how to make it work. We have to do that with the other commercial property owner as well, and we've been in discussions with him
Okay.
having this conversation. And then I think there were a couple residents who spoke earlier tonight, Claire, who are residents of that stretch of Penn Street that you're on. And I think that we also want to talk to them and understand what their concerns are. Because we're assuming they would not want their block to become a new cut through, but we need to talk to them and understand what what's going to work best to sort of manage that, so that we can all kind of jointly have a conversation with the city about how to maintain and manage and design that roadway.
Yeah. Okay. Well, looking forward to meeting with you. And one more thing is these 18 wheelers. It's not frequent. I mean, we don't have an 18 wheeler full of granite, every week. So.
Yeah, but I think you have the access today through the Lowe's property. We need to, we know we need to be able to allow you to continue to operate in that location. And I guess the good news is you're not alone. We have another commercial property owner there that we need to work with as well. And they have a similar problem and probably I think their volume of bigger truck movements is probably bigger than Canif's. So it's not a problem that you're engaging with us on alone. We're gonna want to have conversations with both of you.
Right. Okay, thank you. Now, who will set up that meeting and when? Do you know?
So I think it's typically Jamie that's been initiating those conversations with you. I think Jamie is probably on this call somewhere listening. And Richard, who runs the real estate shop, has just appeared on my screen, so he may want to say something now. So I'll let Richard speak, Claire.
Okay, thank you.
Richard,
I'm back. Yeah, I'll follow up with Jamie. Jamie will follow up with you. We'll get the Jamie and the engineer team now.
Okay, so we have 3 more hand raised questions, and then I think we're gonna follow up with any additional questions via email. Feel free to email any questions in. So I'm gonna call on Sahad, Sue, and Maureen in that order. So Sahad.
Hey, thank you. Hey, Scott, it's me again. So I have a couple of questions. I know it's getting late and it has been a long day for everybody, I assume. So first, Claire actually mentioned that for your land surveying or location basically finding for this project that you are pursuing, was that an internal basically rating that you did, or you consulted with basically City of Quincy officials or anybody local?
Yeah, so we because of the sensitivity of the MBTA sort of exploring real estate opportunities, we try to keep at least the initial exploration kind of under our hat. It can have a significant impact on either real estate deals that may already be in progress or private property values if the MBTA is kind of very loosely talking about a number of properties that it might be interested in buying. So we do try to do the initial analysis as much as we can internally. There will be a lot more detail than we were able to kind of communicate in slides in the federal environmental review filing that we'll be submitting to the Federal Transit Administration within the month, so you can get more information there. I think the presentation we gave tonight, which will be available on the website by tomorrow, if not before, is going to has information where you can kind of understand what sites that we looked at and what their pros and cons were. But I think that once we start with the kind of first principle of we really want to focus on vacant properties or properties that are for sale or for lease, because we know that it ends up being a significant additional cost to the taxpayer if we're displacing a 10-acre large commercial property. We know that that has schedule implications. If you're doing that, you have to factor in the time to kind of relocate that business, and then it's also incredibly disruptive to the business owner and their employees and their customers. So once you start with that principle, the timing ended up being good for the MBTA with the Lowe's becoming vacant. It really was in our mind the best large site with good roadway access close to where the hub of the Quincy bus service is, and that's and that'll be reflected in the filing we submit. We did include 2 additional properties that didn't, in particular the Home Depot property, which didn't meet that kind of first principle of not displacing an existing business. We are going to include those properties in our filing, kind of with the same kind of analysis of how good of a site they would have been in a world where there wasn't an existing business there. So there will be information on those sites as well in that filing.
Okay, great. My second question is that I'll be quick. Is that do you anticipate any increase on basically foot traffic or car traffic or even bus traffic overflowing to either Columbia or Penn Street? I live on Penn Street next to Canif, so I am more interested to know about what's going on Penn Street, especially after your change of plan for that parcel. But I just wanted to know if from visitors, from basically employees, from the buses that come in for servicing, would there be any scenario that you have overflowing in those streets? And also when it comes to people like just crossing Penn Street, because right now, as you know, it's a dead end. With the opening of Columbia, then that would be a different scenario. Basically, now you have open access to Bergen, and I don't know how it's going to be, but I just want to know if you guys have done any analysis of increased basically traffic there.
Yeah, so we did the traffic analysis for the overall site, which found that our traffic volumes are going to be lower than the Lowe's properties travel volumes. But to your specific interests, Sajad, on that portion of Penn Street, in terms of pedestrian access, I mean, our experience being out on the site today is that there are pedestrians. I don't know if they're coming from your block or if they're coming from farther north. There are pedestrians that are coming down Penn and then cutting either behind or in front of the Lowe's, kind of on the Lowe's property, to the MBTA, presumably to the MBTA station, since there's nothing open at Lowe's right now. So, we think that that pedestrian movement would then use this new connection to Bergen and continue on to Quincy Adams along Bergen Parkway. So I don't know that it would create a significant increase or decrease in foot traffic. Perhaps there'll be some MBTA employees that would access the site on foot down your street, but it would be, I don't know any reason why it would be a different volume than the number that might have accessed the Lowe's on foot on your street, either as employees or customers. For vehicle traffic, that's something we just need to work with the city on, because if we didn't do anything other than build this roadway extension and didn't manage the use of it, then I'm sure there would be an increase in at least some traffic using your street to get to Bergen Parkway or coming from Bergen Parkway. So we know that we need to work with you, work with Canif, work with Sullivan, work with the city of Quincy to figure out the best way to kind of manage this roadway so that it's just for authorized vehicles only and it doesn't result in additional traffic on your street. I know there are some cars that come down your street today that end up coming down and realizing it's a dead end and they have to kind of make a U-turn and go back out. So I know there's some traffic that comes down there. That type of thing would likely happen, even in a world where we manage the access perfectly. But it's a problem we know we need to solve. We just haven't got the answer yet, and we need to have more conversations to get there.
Okay, 2 final questions from the hand raise. First Sue, and then Maureen, you'll be up next. Sue, you can go ahead and talk. Okay, we'll come back to you. Maureen Savoie. Maureen, would you like to provide your question or comment? Okay, we will follow up with those folks via email. Okay.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody. This was just like the meeting that Councilor Palmucci hosted back on January 29th. I think it's really great to see how many people participated tonight. We want to be a part of a dialogue with the community, and it's great to know there are so many folks out there that are willing to come and meet us and have these conversations. My contact information, which was at the end of the presentation, as well as the Quincy Bus email address, are both. I'll bring them up one final time. You can reach us through. You can reach us through those methods, and I think our expectation is that we would be coming out for a big format meeting like this again, probably in the fall after the summer. We wanted to get this one in before the summer started, recognizing that some people, even in the current pandemic condition, are going to probably be leaving town. So we wanted to get this meeting in. We'll be back, I believe, in the fall for another update, but that doesn't mean that there can't be other engagement between now and then, and happy to talk with whether it's Councilor Palmucci or following up with the Canna family. Happy to kind of make sure we're keeping the dialogue open. So I want to thank everybody on my team for helping out tonight, and want to thank everybody who participated, and have a great night.